So it's just recording. So I'll bring you on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that shirt say?
Mykonos. I got it on the Greek islands when I went to Europe in 06.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's a great shirt. I've washed it. I mean, it's lasted. If I would have known this, I'd love it. It's so light and cool and comfortable. I would have bought 10 more if I knew what I knew now.
Yeah, it looks comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, Greece it was a lot of fun, I'll tell you.
How long ago was that?
2006.
Oh, wow. Almost 10 years ago.
Well, I'll tell you, they're gregarious people, man. They like to drink and dance and kiss and hug, and I'm into the kissing, hugging, and drinking, but not the dancing.
Oh, boy. All right. Let me count you down. Ready?
Yep.
All right. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2. Well, good morning, everyone. We are here today, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. I am Rick Moscoso, one of your co-hosts on the Bottle Business Sense show. Looking forward to a great show today. But before we get into that, briefly, I want to introduce or bring on my co-host, Mr. Bill Bernard. How are you doing there today, Bill?
I'm doing great, Rick. Good to see you again back here for another Tuesday. And you're right. Before we get started, we probably ought to just do like we do every now and then, a little recap of what our show's about. You know, we started this show some 14, 15 months ago, and our goal was to bring our listeners and viewers a chance to get some legal tips and marketing tips on how to promote and grow their business as well as protect their business. And of course, that's how we came up with the ship in the bottle logo. The business is the ship inside the bottle protects the business, and it moves along on the sea of prosperity, as we like to say. And that's all due to the marketing input of both you and now, of course, our new co-host who's going to join us in a few weeks, Steve Smith. But having said that, we're going to talk today about land trusts, and we're going to talk about how important they can be under the right circumstances. And we're going to cover about, 3 or 4 different bullet points on land trusts. And the first one would be, what is a land trust? Because I'm sure some people out there don't know exactly what it is. And essentially, it's a way to hold title to property held by another person or a trustee while retaining all the rights and privilege of property ownership. Here's what I mean by that. When you create a land trust, the person that you pick as the trustee owns the property. You don't own the property, but you are the beneficiary of that property. And you get to tell the owner what to do. Now, isn't that kind of unique? Because in a regular living trust, and we'll talk just briefly about that, the distinctions in a little bit, a beneficiary doesn't get to tell, generally, the creator of that trust what to do. But here in a land trust, you are the beneficiary and the creator, but you have a trustee who owns the property. And the trustee only acts upon your direction, you being the beneficiary of that property.
Well, that's a very interesting entity then for in this situation. So if you don't own the property and you're only a beneficiary, then what is it really used for?
Well, it's principally used for, it can be used for a number of different things, but a lot of people use it for real estate investing. And I think we may have mentioned this on a prior show. I can't recall, but one of the things that Walt Disney did when they purchased all of the property in Florida for Walt Disney World was to purchase all of these properties in different sections or different acreages under a land trust. Why did they do that? Well, we're going to talk about one of those features or benefits of a land trust in a minute, but privacy. Because imagine the bidding war that would have occurred had people found out that Disneyland or Walt Disney was buying all of this property in Florida to create a new Disney World. Mm-hmm. So he did it anonymously by creating a land trust. And so the owner, Joe Blow, or whoever it might have been, was buying all this property. Walt Disney was the beneficiary of the land trust. He was telling Joe Blow what to do. And of course, it's a big way to invest in property. If you're a real estate investor, if you're just an investor who wants to diversify and isn't into just the stocks and bonds and the mutual funds and all the good stuff the market has to offer, you can use a land trust for that purpose. But it's a way to invest in any property, or hold any property is a better way to say it, without anybody knowing who actually is the beneficiary of that property.
Is there a certain, like, I guess in his instance, or anyone else's that's using this vehicle, is there a requirement to actually reveal the beneficiary, or are there times when they just don't reveal it?
No, you never know who the beneficiary is. That's the great thing about it. And now having the first advantage is you can avoid probate. Your spouse, your children, other successors can bypass costly time-consuming probate proceedings and can sell or refinance property they get by way of a land trust if they're the beneficiaries. So it's similar to a living trust in the sense that you now have assets passed to you by way of a living trust. Well, now the specific asset that's passing to you is real property, and it's being passed to you by way of a land trust, so you do not have to go to probate court. Even if you don't have a living trust, if you're the beneficiary of a land trust, that property is going to pass to you as the beneficiary, and you don't have to go to probate court should that trustee pass away. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit, what falls right after that, Rick? One of the beauties about this is you can protect your credit, right? Let's say that property that's owned by the trustee, let's say you run into some issues with it, and there's some bad credit reports that come out about the property. Property runs into some financial problems. Creditors are coming after the trustee. The beneficiary will not have anything show up on his personal credit report with respect to that property that's owned by the trustee, and with respect to the fact that even though the individual owns the property, is a beneficiary of the property, he will not have anything reported on his personal credit report. It will only be lodged against the property. And what I mean by that is, mechanics liens or tax liens or something of that nature, where the property accumulates some sort of credit lien against it. That issue is not going to show up on the credit report of the individual who's the beneficiary. Give you an example. I own some property. I used to own some property in St. Louis, Missouri, and I owned it by way of a LLC. And I didn't have any credit issues at all, but had there been some credit issues, let's say I didn't pay my sewer bill or my water bill, there would have been a lien placed against my property and therefore against the LLC that owned my property. And if they came after that LLC to pay these thousands of dollars in past liens, that would have been reported against the LLC, but not against me personally, because I didn't own the property. It's similar to a land trust where you will not have any personal credit issues. You are insulated from property liens and any judgments as well. Let's say a judgment is had against that property. And there is now a judgment for a payoff of some sort against that property. That's not going to show up on your personal credit report, even though you're the beneficiary of that property, and even though you get to tell the trustee of that land trust what to do and when to do it.
So when you create this land trust, who are the parties that would actually know who the beneficiary is?
Just the trustee. And I'm glad you asked that question, because the beauty of a land trust, Rick, is it creates a personality, a personal ownership in property. Why? Because it's a contract. It is a contract. Let me say that again. It is a contract. Therefore, the land trust never gets recorded with the county recorder's office. Never, ever. And you ought to jump off a bridge if you ever try to do that. So let me talk a little bit about how you transfer property. It's considered personal property. Your beneficiary interest in that land trust is considered personal property because it's done by way of a contract. So let's talk a little bit about how you transfer it. Let's say your trustee is going to purchase new property on your behalf. The trustee's name is put in the buyer's line in the purchase and sale agreement. Joe Blow, trustee of the John Doe Land Trust. Okay? Got to have a name for the trust. The trustee then signs that purchase and sale agreement, not you. Now, if it's an existing property that you want to transfer into a land trust, you simply prepare a deed for the existing owner who's selling it to you. Mary Jones is selling the John Doe Land Trust to the trustee, Joe Blow, John Doe. Let's make it easy, John Doe. John Doe then files that deed with the county recorder's office. He then signs the land trust agreement, making you the beneficiary. That land trust agreement goes in the safe or the safe deposit box. The only thing that gets filed with the county recorder's office is the new deed, because you've transferred property from one person or one company into the land trust itself. That land trust is going to show up on the county recorder's office as the owner of that property now, but nobody knows who's the beneficiary of that land trust. Nobody has any idea.
So typically when you do something like this, who I guess commonly would be assigned as the trustee?
Well, you could pick a company, you could pick a professional trustee like a bank or an insurance company. You pick an individual, because remember, that individual owns the property by way of the land trust. And if that individual is going to, if that's somebody you trust, and after all, the world of trusts is based on that word, trust, right? And you can get that individual to own the trust for you, own the property for you. But remember, the trustee owns the property on behalf of the trust. So the trust is the one that's going to have the liens or the judgments or whatever else comes down the pike lodged against it.
Not the trustee. Not the trustee.
Not the trustee. Not more importantly, not the beneficiary.
Right.
So the next advantage then, besides the credit issues and the easy transfer of property, would also be the privacy issue that we spoke of earlier. Legal ownership of property is listed with the county recorder's office, as we just spoke about. That's why property owners are constantly being solicited by mortgage brokers, by banks to refinance their property. You ever wonder why you get all these refinance offers in the mail? It's because all they got to do is look at the county recorder's sheet and they can tell who owns the property. Well, here, the land trust owns the property, so you as the beneficiary is not going to be bombarded with all that junk. But that's a side issue. That's just a way of showing it's private. The real privacy issue is when you're in deals like I spoke about earlier at the top of the show, like Walt Disney. Here you're talking about a major corporation that could create a huge bidding war. They want to come in and they want to buy this property at a really good, cheap rate, right? Well, are you going to sell it, all this property, to Joe Blow at the same rate that you'd sell it to Walt Disney World or Walt Disney Company at Disney? You're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So Walt Disney created a land trust where they were the beneficiaries and they could purchase this property through their trustee in complete anonymity, complete privacy.
So on paper, who's on the hook for, I'm assuming it's the entity that's on the hook for property taxes and all the financials, right?
Right. And going one step further, Rick, you could actually you could hold title to real estate in the form of a land trust and put that land trust in the LLC or in an LLC if you wanted to. You could make the you could make the land trust a member of an LLC. Now, I don't want to get too far afield here because that's something that would take up more time, and it's going to probably get into some other areas that the show wasn't geared to talk about today. But if you want privacy and you want asset protection, now whatever the trust does wrong, the land trust does wrong, if anything, their liability is limited based on their membership value in the LLC, right? So you place that land trust in an LLC, and now you have the LLC protection that any other member would have based on their membership in an LLC. Your business assets are protected. Remember when we talked about way back the first show we ever did, Rick, when you entice your entities, S Corp, C Corp, LLC, whatever it might be, provides you personal asset protection, right? It provides you a protection from people reaching your personal assets. Mm-hmm. Well, it could work the same way if a land trust is placed in an LLC. That liability is going to be limited to the configuration of the LLC. And if you want to know how liability is limited for LLCs and S Corps and C Corps and other business entities, check out some of our first shows or go on our Bottle Business Sense show website, and there is a find application, I believe, on there, right, Rick? Maybe it's a good time to explain that. How do people go to our website and find specific topics that might be in our shows?
Yeah, they can search via keywords, or there's a whole categories of topics. So if you select entities, I think that's one of our categories in there. Right. That episode will come up.
Okay. One of the other things I wanted to mention that I think is important, Rick, is some highlights of a land trust. It's sort of a recap, but not quite. I want to point out some final highlights before we recap. Land trusts are legal in every single state. Can you take a wild guess? And I wouldn't be surprised, if you didn't get it, but because you don't do this every day. But can you take a wild guess as to why that might be?
Okay. I don't know, but I'm sure you're going to tell us.
Okay. Because a land trust is a what? Contract. Do you know of any state in the union that doesn't have the legalization of contracts, that doesn't have some sort of contract law? No. A land trust is a contract. It makes the contract for the for the real property that you are the beneficiary of, it makes it into a real, it makes let me repeat that. It makes the real property that you are the beneficiary of into a personal property asset because it's created by way of contract. It's a contract between the trustee and the beneficiary. Something else that's incredibly important, Rick, is that a land trust is transparent to the IRS. So whoever receives the profits that is made by way of the land trust, that's who's going to claim it on their personal return. Well, that's going to be the beneficiary, right? Because he's going to be profiting from the land trust. Remember, the trustee in the land trust holds the property for the benefit of the beneficiary. The beneficiary tells them what to do. So any profits coming in by way of that land trust activity is given to the beneficiary. That beneficiary claims it on his personal tax return. That's completely legitimate by way of IRS sanction. The IRS has sanctioned that.
Right. But so then during that process, couldn't it be uncovered or revealed that this property that was purchased via the land trust is now all of a sudden, now we know who the beneficiary is?
No. Good question, but no. And here's why. For years I've been in for the last 29 years. I've been a litigator for many years. For most of those 29 years, almost all of them. And the reason I bring that up is because when you try to go out, there's very specific, very difficult guidelines in place in courts pursuant to federal and state law that make it almost impossible to discover somebody's personal returns. There are very specific, limited instances when tax returns are discoverable, and that's not a topic for this show. Litigation, when we do another litigation show, we can talk about that. But no, that's by far not a concern. One of the things that should be mentioned is in sort of a recap here is that the beneficiary does not own the trust property, as we mentioned. Only an interest in the trust property is owned by the beneficiary. That makes it a personal property interest, even though it's real property. The trustee owns the trust property, the trust. One of the things that many investors do, Rick, is to put separate properties in separate land trusts. Here's another beauty about a land trust. A land trust is very, compared to most legal documents, inexpensive. A land trust is at most 2 pages, sometimes 1 page. So you can create a land trust contract very conveniently, very economically, and therefore it's not it's not a deal breaker for individuals who want to place several different properties in different land trusts. So if you want to have 10 land trusts because you have 10 properties, let's say it costs you a couple $100 to do each land trust. That's not very much money when you think about it, as an investment tool to make 10 or 12 land trusts and put each property in a separate land trust.
Now, would it be common to consider doing a separate land trust for every single investment property that you do, or just put it all into one?
I mean, I would advise it because it's easier to manage, and you want to have any liens against that land trust, if they come your way, or any judgments, be only against the land trust and what the land trust owns, right? If the land trust owns more than one property, you may be exposing more value to take care of that lien or judgment than you would if you had each property in separate land trusts. I think it's probably, Rick, at this point appropriate to let everybody know the major distinction between a living trust and a land trust. And it's really not as complicated as most people might think. A living trusts usually deal with all of your assets. Many times it's the same trustee and the same beneficiary. For example, husband and wife create the trust. Husband and wife are also the beneficiaries. By that I mean when the husband dies, the wife is the beneficiary to that trust. Now, there may be other beneficiaries in place when that wife dies. Okay? But those beneficiaries cannot tell the wife what to do. In a land trust, not all assets are placed in a land trust. Usually it's real property. Usually it's for investment purposes. And in that instance, the beneficiary can tell the trustee exactly what to do and how to do it. So those are are some of the principal major distinctions, not to mention in a living trust, you have a living trust package, and that comes with powers of attorney for assets, powers of attorney for healthcare directives, which is otherwise known as a living will. You have trust certifications, those types of things that all come with the management and control of your total estate. You're not managing and controlling your total estate in a land trust.
So in this situation, let's say you have a wife and a husband as beneficiaries. I don't know if it would be typical if you would have, let's say you have one kid that's also listed as a beneficiary. And then, so are you saying then all three of them have equal ability to make the decision for that particular land trust?
Well, that would depend on how they set up their managing division. By the way, that brings up an interesting point. Let's say you make an LLC a beneficiary of a land trust. Well, in an LLC, you may have 3 members, right? And you may have in your operating agreement the fact that 2 members must vote a certain way in order to get anything done. Well, if those 2 members vote a certain way, then as the beneficiary of that land trust, that's the way the land trust that's the actions the trustee is going to take on behalf of the land trust and the beneficiary. So if you just have individuals that are beneficiaries, you're going to have to come to some kind of a compromise on to how the decision process is being made. That may require another contract of some sort, but typically you'd have one person in charge that make those decisions. But one of the things I wanted to mention that I think is important, Rick, that you brought up earlier when you mentioned who should be the trustee, a really great way to do this is to have an out-of-state trustee.
No, why is that?
Well, let's say that you get sued. Let's say the land trust gets sued. Well, they have to serve the trustee. And let's say they serve the trustee and the trustee resigns. Now you have an alternate trustee in New Hampshire. Okay, the first trustee was in Washington State. The second alternate trustee is in New Hampshire. Now they got to sue and serve the trustee in New Hampshire. Now he resigns and the second alternative comes into play and he's in Texas. Now they got to serve him. So in other words, it's going to cost a great deal of money to pursue litigation in this sense. Okay, so there's various little ways that you can work this to make it more difficult for those nasty, lousy lawyers to come after you and try to get money from you, right?
Right.
Because, there's a few good ones, right, Rick? You better say right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a lot of them, at the urging of their clients, will go after you. So you can make an LLC a trustee. Conversely, who can be beneficiaries? Well, an LLC, we just mentioned that. Another trust can be a beneficiary, and a corporation can be a beneficiary as well as an individual. So there are a number of different interesting ways to concoct and construct a land trust, a trustee, and a beneficiary of a land trust that go far beyond the bounds of this program. This objective today is to give you some insight as to what land trusts are used for, how you can very easily create one, and how it gives you the privacy, among other benefits, because it's not recorded in any county recorder's office. You extrapolate from that, Rick, ways to invest, how to go further in protecting your interests by combining it with different other business entities. These get kind of convoluted, but if you're just a real estate investor and all you want to do is create a land trust, it's very simple, it's very economical, and boom, you're off to the races, creating a bunch of properties in different states under different land trusts.
So that leads me to one last question then. If a couple is just they just want to real estate invest and they set up a land trust, and should they perish or pass, who becomes the beneficiary of the property?
Well, they would have. You could do that in a couple of ways. One, you have an alternate beneficiary that's set up by way of the land trusts being in a living trust. Okay, you can set up your beneficiaries in a living trust as to who would receive as beneficiaries any interests that you have once you pass. Okay. You can create more than one beneficiary to the land trust and set it up to where if one passes, the other gets it. It just depends on whether you are, and I would suggest if you have several different land trusts, you incorporate it as part of your estate planning. Because remember, one thing we didn't mention at the top of the show, Rick, and I'm glad you brought this up. A land trust is technically speaking an estate planning tool. Okay? A land trust is an estate planning tool. It's just a hybrid of what a living trust might be because it has different features to it. The principal feature being that a beneficiary can tell the trustee exactly what he or she wants done.
Right.
So I hope if people want more information on this, I'm more than happy to take phone calls from them or meet with them. And my numbers, we post them all the time. They're 949 area code 413-6535-698-6222. WFBlegalconsulting.com. Email is bill@WFBlegalconsulting.com. So if there's any more information that people want about this, or and even more specifically real estate investors, but you don't have to be a real estate investor to partake in this, then I would urge them to call me and we can discuss it further in more detail with respect to their particular circumstances.
Right. Well, this has been a great show, Bill. I really appreciate you sharing this information because I know there's me as a future real estate investor. This information is really good to know. And for those of you that are interested in this vehicle, please reach out to Bill. He knows what he's talking about. In fact, he's one of the good lawyers that he was referring to out there. So reach out to Bill. The numbers are below the video. And just give him a call, and he can certainly consult with you and help you out. So,
and I had a client recently send me a lawyer joke book, a book of lawyer jokes, and the irony of all that is, they have an affinity for you or they like you when they do something like that because they figure, boy, this would take some nerve to do typically, but I know I can send it to him and he won't mind and he'll get a chuckle out of it. So if any lawyer out there gets a lawyer joke book from their client, you can be sure you're doing a great job.
That's great. Well, folks, thanks again for joining us today. If you have any questions, reach out to Bill. If you would like to be a potential guest on the show, please send us your request to bottlebusinesssense@gmail.com. We're all over social media. And again, you can view previous episodes on our website at bottlebusinesssenseshow.com. And all over social media. Now,
let's not forget, Rick. Let's let everybody know how to get through to R2 Visual Studios if they need, some great marketing video techniques.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Bill. You can always reach out to me at rick@r2visualstudios.com or give me a ring at 949-667-1182. Be happy to help you out with any social media, any video marketing tips that you might need, or again, there's a bunch of resources on the Bottle Business Sense Show website. So you're welcome to go back there. Now, in the last several shows, we have been talking about our third co-host that's going to be joining the Bottle Business Sense Show. Bill, you want to just give people a preview of what we're doing there?
Yes, we're currently meeting with Rick. Rick and I are currently meeting with Steve Smith, our new co-host, and we're mapping out some issues. And we were planning on having him start on August 18th. That's still our plan, but that may get pushed back a week or so. We don't know quite yet, but look for a media press release, which will be coming out on social media. And you can always find that there. I post on, I post on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Google Plus page. I also post on a social media site called Alignable that I like very much. So if you just Google us, Bottle Business Sense Show, you'll see a media release that'll be coming up, and that will specifically identify when when Steve will be joining our show. I'm still hoping it's the 18th, but it may get pushed back a week or so. We just don't know yet. So look for that, and we're both. I think I speak for Rick when I say we're both very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be exciting to add the Steve to the show. Can't wait. So be on the lookout for the press release. And until next time, I'm Rick Moscoso, Bottle Business Sense Show. We look forward to seeing you again next week at 10 a.m. right here, same bat time, same bat channel.
Okay, take care, everybody. Have a prosperous week. Okay, good.